For my 30th birthday, my husband served me divorce papers right at the dinner table. His best friend, sitting across from me, laughed. He'd made a bet that I would cry. Women are so predictable, he smirked. They didn't predict what I did next. I pulled out my pen, signed the papers without shedding a tear, and then handed them a beautifully wrapped present. The color drained from their faces when they opened it. They thought they were ending a marriage. They had no idea they had just started a war. This is the story of how I took back everything they stole from me. And then some. Follow my story to see how a woman scorned dismantles an empire. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments what you think was in the box. The crystal wine glasses at Oriole were so delicate they felt like captured breath against my fingertips. Everything in the restaurant was designed to feel ethereal, from the soaring ceilings to the soft glow of the lights that made every patron look like a subject in a master's painting. It was a place designed for celebrations, for moments you were supposed to cherish. But as I sat there on my 30th birthday, the only thing I felt was the oppressive weight of the two men sitting with me. On my right was my husband, Liam Carter. 5 years ago, I had fallen for his easy charm and the way his smile seemed to chase the shadows from any room. He was a rising star in finance, ambitious and driven, a perfect match for the daughter of a real estate magnate. Or so everyone said. Now, his smile didn't reach his eyes, and his hand rested on his knee, not mine. A subtle distance had carved a canyon between us over the last year, a quiet, chilling erosion of intimacy. Across from me, sipping a ridiculously expensive scotch, was Julian Croft, Liam's best friend. Julian was old money, with a kind of casual arrogance that came from never having been told no in his life. He wore his tailored suit like a second skin and looked at the world as if it were his personal chessboard. I'd never liked him. He had a way of looking at me, a dismissive smirk always playing on his lips, as if I were a frivolous accessory Liam had acquired. To him, I was just a predictable, pretty wife. Liam, once my rock, had slowly been molded by Julian's influence, his opinions and desires echoing Julian's own. To 30 Izzy, Liam said, raising his glass. The toast felt hollow, a perfunctory gesture. May this next decade bring you everything you deserve. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It held a finality that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Happy birthday, Isabella, Julian added, his voice smooth as silk. He always used my full name, a subtle power play to remind me he saw me not as the lively Izzy everyone knew, but as a formal, distant entity. I forced a smile, the muscles in my cheeks aching with the effort. Thank you both. It's a beautiful dinner. I swirled the deep red Cabernet in my glass, watching the light fracture through it. I felt like that light, shattered into a million pieces, held together only by the thinnest veneer of composure. I had known deep down that something was irrevocably broken. I just hadn't expected it to be tonight. The waiter, with practiced grace, cleared our dessert plates. The remnants of my flourless chocolate cake, a birthday treat I hadn't wanted, were whisked away, leaving a stark white tablecloth between us. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed restaurant. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a plain manila envelope. It was thick and official-looking. He slid it across the polished wood table, stopping it neatly beside my water glass. He wouldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder, his jaw tight. My heart didn't drop. It didn't pound. It simply stopped. For a single, frozen second, the entire world went silent. I knew, with absolute certainty, what was inside. This was it. The final act of the slow, painful play our marriage had become. Izzy, he began, his voice a low, rehearsed monotone. This isn't easy to say. I watched Julian out of the corner of my eye. He leaned back in his chair, a spectator in the front row, a glint of cruel anticipation in his dark eyes. He was enjoying this. We've grown apart, Liam continued, the words sounding like they belonged to someone else. We want different things. I think, for both our sakes, it's time to be honest and move on. My fingers felt numb as I reached for the envelope. The paper was cool and impersonal. I broke the seal, my movements deliberate and steady, a strange calm washing over me. Inside, just as I'd expected, was a stack of papers held together by a binder clip. The bold heading stared up at me. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I scanned the first page. His name, Liam Anderson Carter. My name, Isabella Rose Carter. The legalese swam before my eyes, but the message was brutally clear. It was over. And he had chosen my 30th birthday dinner, a public forum, to execute the final blow. I didn't look up from the papers. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for the reaction. The tears. The pleading. The predictable, feminine hysteria they were so clearly expecting. I could feel Liam's nervous energy radiating across the table, a stark contrast to Julian's smug stillness. It was Julian who broke the silence, his voice a conspiratorial whisper, meant only for Liam but pitched just loud enough for me to hear. "Told you," he murmured, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "Right on cue. I bet him you'd cry, Izzy. Women are so predictable." That was it. That was the spark. In that single venomous moment, any lingering trace of sadness, any whisper of heartbreak, was incinerated by a white-hot surge of fury. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a game. A performance orchestrated for their amusement. My pain was the punchline to a joke, the prize in a vulgar bet between two entitled boys. All the little slights, the years of feeling dismissed and gaslight, the way Julian's presence had poisoned the man I thought I loved. It all coalesced into this one brutal, calculated insult. They hadn't just ended our marriage. They had tried to humiliate me, to strip me of my dignity for sport. My grief vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. They thought I was predictable. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I lifted my head slowly, my gaze meeting Liam's first. His face was a mask of strained indifference, but his eyes flickered with a coward's anxiety. Then I looked at Julian. His smirk was fully formed now, triumphant and condescending. He thought he had won. Without a word, I reached into my clutch, a birthday gift to myself, and pulled out a heavy, expensive fountain pen. It was a gift from my father, a man who taught me that your signature was your bond. The cap unscrewed with a soft, satisfying click. My hand didn't shake. I spread the signature page flat on the table, found the line marked Respondent, and signed my name. Isabella Rose Carter. The ink was a bold, defiant black against the stark white paper. I didn't just sign it, I endorsed it, my flourish sharp and definitive. I capped the pen, the click echoing in the tense silence. Then I neatly stacked the papers and slid the entire packet back across the table. It came to a stop directly in front of Liam. "Happy now?" My voice was unervingly calm, devoid of the tears they'd gambled on. It was as cool and clear as the ice in Julian's scotch. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Liam stared at the signed papers as if they'd burned his hand. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked utterly bewildered, his script forgotten, his plan derailed. Julian's smirk faltered. The smug satisfaction in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. This wasn't the dramatic, messy scene he had envisioned. The crying, broken woman he had bet on had failed to make her appearance. I had stolen their climax, leaving them with nothing but anticlimax and a disquieting sense of unease. They were stunned into a rare, beautiful silence. Before either of them could recover, I reached for my purse again. I pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped gift box, tied with a simple black silk ribbon. I had brought it for Liam, a vintage watch I thought he'd love. Now, it had a new purpose. I placed it on the table between them, the box landing with a soft, definitive thud. "I almost forgot," I said, my voice laced with a chilling sweetness that was entirely foreign to me. "This is for both of you. A little something to remember the occasion." Liam looked at the box, then at me, his eyes wide with suspicion. Julian narrowed his gaze, scrutinizing the gift as if it might explode. For a moment, they just stared at it. It was Julian, his curiosity finally outweighing his caution, who reached out and pulled the ribbon loose. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was not a watch. It was a single ornate, old-fashioned key, its brass head engraved with a small stylized C4 Carter, my family's initial. Lying next to it was a small, folded piece of cardstock. Liam leaned over to see. He unfolded the note. I knew the words by heart. I had written them an hour before leaving for the restaurant, a sudden, divine spark of intuition guiding my hand. He read them aloud, his voice barely a whisper. To the home you built on my secrets. You'll need this. I watched their faces. I watched the blood drain from them. I watched the smug confidence evaporate, replaced by a ghastly white mask of confusion that quickly curdled into dawning horror. They looked from the key to the note, then back at each other, a silent, frantic conversation passing between them. They didn't understand what it meant, not yet, but they understood one thing perfectly. This was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of one. And for the first time all night, I smiled. A real smile. It felt like a promise. It felt like a threat. The taxi pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the damp New York night. I didn't direct it to the gleaming glass tower on the Upper East Side where Liam and I had a penthouse that overlooked Central Park. That wasn't my home anymore. It was just a gilded cage, and I had finally been set free. Instead, I stood before a nondescript brownstone in Greenwich Village. My hand was steady as I unlocked the door to a garden-level apartment I had secretly leased 3 weeks ago. The first month's rent and security deposit had taken a significant bite out of the personal savings account my mother had left me. An account Liam didn't know existed. He thought my finances were completely entangled with his. Another one of his many assumptions. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished with a second-hand couch, a bed, and a simple wooden table I planned to use as a desk. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. As I closed the door behind me, the city's noise faded to a distant hum. For the first time in years, I was completely alone, and the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like sanctuary. Sinking onto the couch, I finally let the facade of calm dissolve. But it wasn't tears that came. It was clarity. I thought back over the past year, the bad investments that chipped away at my inheritance, the way Liam started handling all the finances, claiming he wanted to unburden me. The casual mentions of my father's company, struggling, in the current market. It wasn't a sudden implosion. It was a controlled demolition, planned and executed with painstaking precision. And I had been standing at ground zero, oblivious. By morning, the cold fury had sharpened into a singular focus. I was a freelance graphic designer, a job Liam and Julian had always dismissed as a cute little hobby. But my hobby meant I lived and breathed technology. I understood the digital skeletons people left behind. I made coffee, the strong bitter aroma cutting through the morning haze, and sat down at my table with my laptop. My mind raced, searching for a loose thread. And then I found it. The Carter family cloud account. Liam had set it up years ago to share vacation photos with my parents. I hadn't accessed it in ages, but I knew he used it for file backups, convinced it was more secure than other platforms. He was arrogant in his tech savviness, which often made him careless. My fingers flew across the keyboard. My password still worked. The main folders were just what I expected: vacations, holidays, family photos. It looked clean. Too clean. But I knew better. I navigated to the hidden files, the ones most users don't even know exist. And there it was. A trash folder that hadn't been permanently emptied. My breath caught. It was a digital graveyard of deleted files. Most were innocuous, but then I saw them. Drafts of emails between Liam and Julian. Password-protected spreadsheets with cryptic names like Project Nightingale and Asset Realignment. Scanned documents pertaining to holding companies I'd never heard of. I spent the next several hours running recovery software, patiently piecing together the fragmented data. The full picture was still a blur, but the outline was becoming terrifyingly clear. I saw transactions, wire transfers from my family's corporate accounts to these mysterious shell companies. I saw Julian's name, again and again, as a signatory. It was a complex web of deceit, and at the center of it was my father's company. A wave of nausea washed over me. I pushed back from the laptop and walked to the window, staring out at the small walled garden. I saw my father's face, not as he was in his final weary months, but as I loved to remember him. Laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his arms slung around a much younger Liam's shoulders at a family barbecue. "This one's a keeper, Izzy," he had told me once, clapping Liam on the back. "Sharp as a tack. He's going to do great things." My father, Robert Carter, had been a brilliant real estate developer, but his greatest flaw was his trust. He built his empire on handshakes and his word. He saw Liam's ambition not as a threat, but as a reflection of his own younger self. He'd made Liam a junior partner, given him access, trusted him with the legacy he had spent a lifetime building. His death, just over a year ago, had been ruled an accident. A heart attack while driving home late from the office. He was only 58. At the time, I was too consumed by grief to question it. Now, seeing the timeline of these transactions, a sickening suspicion began to form in my mind. The most aggressive financial moves, the siphoning of the most significant assets, had begun in the weeks immediately following his death. Liam had used my grief as a cover. They both had. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was an assault on my father, on his memory, on everything he had ever worked for. The key. The cryptic note. "To the home you built on my secrets." It wasn't about the penthouse. It was my father's voice, a message from the grave. The key wasn't for a house. It was for the safe deposit box he'd opened in my name when I turned 21. He'd told me it was for a rainy day. In the whirlwind of my wedding and life with Liam, I had completely forgotten about it. The next morning, I walked into a Chase Bank branch downtown, my heart hammering against my ribs. I presented the key and my ID, my hand trembling slightly as I signed the access log. A stoic bank employee led me into the vault, the massive steel door swinging open with a heavy groan. He retrieved box number 314, placed it in a private viewing room, and left, closing the door behind him. I stared at the cold, metal box. This was it. The truth, one way or another. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry or cash. There were only two items. The first was a thick, leather-bound ledger. The second was a slim moleskine journal. My father's journal. My hands shook as I opened it. His familiar, architectural handwriting filled the pages. The early entries were full of hope, notes about new projects, pride in my marriage. But the tone shifted dramatically in the last year of his life. He wrote of his growing unease, of Julian Croft's sudden, intense interest in the company's portfolio. He detailed investment advice from Julian that seemed designed to fail, and Liam's new, aggressive financial strategies that seemed to isolate long-time employees and expose the company to unnecessary risk. "Liam is changing," one entry read. "He has Julian's voice in his ear. Something feels wrong. It feels predatory." My blood ran cold. I put the journal aside and opened the ledger. It was my father's private record, a shadow account book detailing every transaction he had grown suspicious of. Page after page laid out the scheme in his meticulous hand. It was a classic, brutal hostile takeover from within. Julian, using Liam as his inside man, had identified the company's most valuable, unencumbered properties. They had then created a series of shell corporations to systematically load the parent company, Carter Holdings, with toxic debt. They initiated bad deals, bought failing properties at inflated prices, and bled the company dry, all while funneling the siphoned cash and valuable assets into their own anonymous accounts. Their endgame was clear. Once Carter Holdings was on the brink of bankruptcy, one of Julian's shell companies would swoop in and buy the entire portfolio, including the properties they had stolen and hidden, for pennies on the dollar. They weren't just stealing from me, they were stealing the company itself. The divorce was the final, brilliant move. As my husband, Liam's actions could have been legally tied to me, giving me a claim. By severing our marriage and painting me as nothing more than a jilted wife, they thought they could sever my legal standing, leaving me with nothing but the scraps of a company drowning in debt they had created. I closed the ledger, the cold leather feeling like a block of ice. I stared at the wall of the sterile viewing room, but I saw only their laughing faces at my birthday dinner. The bet. The smug satisfaction. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had given me the one thing my father couldn't, a roadmap to their destruction. And I would follow it all the way home. The vibrant, sociable Izzy Carter was dead. She had been laid to rest in that restaurant, along with a naive woman who believed in fairy tales. In her place, a ghost was born. I cut my long, sun-streaked hair into a chic, dark bob. I traded my colorful wardrobe for shades of gray, black, and navy, the colors of the city, the colors of a shadow. I became someone who could fade into a crowd, unremarkable and unseen. My work became my weapon. Liam and Julian had mocked my hobby, but they had no idea of its power. I wasn't just a graphic designer. I was a creator of identities. I spent a week building my ghost. I created a fake online persona, Ava Renshaw, a low-profile wealth management consultant with a pristine, if fabricated, LinkedIn profile and a carefully curated, understated social media presence. Ava was smart, connected, but not flashy. She followed the right financial analysts on Twitter, joined exclusive online forums for venture capitalists, and commented intelligently but infrequently on articles about market trends. She was a digital whisper. Through Ava, I entered Julian's world. I didn't engage with him directly. I engaged with his periphery, his associates, his rivals, the people in his orbit. I listened. I learned about the deals he was proud of, the partners he was meeting, the quiet rumors that circulated about his aggressive tactics. Every piece of data, no matter how small, was a thread I carefully collected and wove into the tapestry of my plan. My digital spying could only take me so far. I needed human intelligence. I needed someone who knew the inner workings of Carter Holdings. My mind immediately went to one person, Maria Flores. Maria had been my father's executive assistant for over 20 years. She was sharp, fiercely loyal, and knew the company better than anyone. One of Liam's first acts after my father's death was to restructure and let Maria go, replacing her with a younger, less inquisitive assistant. He had called it a necessary business decision. I now knew he was eliminating a threat. I found her working at a small accounting firm in Queens. I waited for her after work, standing across the street, feeling a tremor of nerves. What if she blamed my family for her dismissal? What if she wanted nothing to do with this? "Maria," I said, my voice quiet as she approached. She stopped, her eyes widening in surprise. Recognition warred with a deep, weary sadness. "Isabella. I heard about the divorce. I'm so sorry." "It's for the best," I said, cutting to the chase. "Maria, I know why Liam fired you. It wasn't business. It was because you knew too much. You were loyal to my father." We sat in a quiet coffee shop, and I laid out everything. The journal, the ledger, the digital trail. I watched her face shift from shock to a slow-burning, righteous anger. She had harbored her own suspicions for months, small inconsistencies and strange directives from Liam that had never sat right with her. "That bastardo," she whispered, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "Your father. He was a good man. He treated me like family." Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the same fire I felt in my own gut. "What do you need, Izzy?" My ghost had found her voice. My solo mission now had a partner. Maria was my link to the past, the keeper of the company's human secrets, the names of loyal employees who had been pushed out, the old vendors who had been cheated, the paper files stored in deep archives that Liam and Julian would have overlooked. We had an alliance forged in loyalty and a shared desire for justice. With Maria's knowledge supplementing my father's ledger, the picture of their fraud became devastatingly complete. Now, it was time to plant the seeds of their destruction. A frontal assault was foolish. I needed to create an environment of suspicion and scrutiny around them, to make their world shrink until they had nowhere to hide. My first target was the media. I researched financial journalists for weeks, finally settling on Ben Holloway, an investigative reporter for a reputable online financial journal known for his tenacity in exposing corporate malfeasance. He was a bloodhound. Using a public library computer and a heavily encrypted email service, I sent him an anonymous tip. I didn't give him everything, just the first, tantalizing thread, evidence of a single fraudulent real estate transfer from Carter Holdings to Nightingale Assets, one of Julian's shell companies. I included just enough of the ledger to prove its authenticity. My second target was the government. A full-blown SEC investigation would take too long and could be quashed by Julian's high-priced lawyers. So I aimed lower. I found a junior compliance officer in the SEC's New York office, a young, ambitious woman named Sarah Jenkins, whose online profile suggested she was hungry to make a name for herself. To her, I sent a different piece of the puzzle: evidence of stock manipulation related to a supplier of Carter Holdings. It was a smaller crime, but it was a clear violation that would fall squarely within her jurisdiction. It was a small fire, easy for her to start, that I knew would eventually grow to engulf the entire forest. I sent the emails and walked away. The seeds were planted. Now, I had to wait for them to grow in the dark. It took 2 weeks. The first sign of a crack appeared as a small article on Holloway's news site, buried in the business section. The headline was innocuous: "Questions arise over asset management in recent real estate portfolios." It didn't name names, but it detailed the exact structure of the fraudulent transfer I had leaked. It was a warning shot. Maria, who still had friends inside the company, heard the chatter. Liam had been in a rage, demanding to know who could have leaked the information. Julian was dismissive, calling it yellow journalism. But the tension was there. A week later, the second crack appeared. Maria learned that a low-level inquiry had been opened by the SEC. It was just a formal request for documents related to the supplier company I had flagged for Sarah Jenkins. It was a tiny bureaucratic headache, but it was official. It meant someone, somewhere, was watching. The best part was watching them turn on each other. Through the sophisticated spyware I'd installed on Liam's personal laptop before I left, a parting gift he'd never discover, I could monitor his emails. I saw the panicked exchanges. "Liam, did you see the Holloway piece? This is too specific, Julian." "Julian, relax. It's nothing. A disgruntled employee. We'll handle it." "Liam, and the SEC inquiry? Is that nothing too? My name is on those documents." "Julian, you're getting paranoid. Hold your nerve. You wanted this, remember? Don't fall apart now." Their trust, built on a foundation of shared greed, was beginning to erode under the weight of paranoia. They were looking for a traitor inside their organization, never once suspecting the ghost on the outside. The media and the SEC were slow-moving beasts. I needed a catalyst, a public explosion that would force all the hidden secrets into the light. I found him in my father's journal. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was a seasoned investor who had partnered with my father on a few successful projects years ago. According to my father's notes, Julian had later swindled Marcus in a separate deal, using tactics similar to the ones he was using on Carter Holdings. Marcus had threatened to sue, but Julian had buried him in legal fees and intimidation until he was forced to retreat, broken and furious. Marcus was the one that got away, a ghost from Julian's past. It took Maria's help to find him. He was semi-retired, living quietly in Connecticut. I sent him a package, delivered by a courier. Inside was no note, no name. Just a flash drive. On it, I put 2 files. The first was a detailed account of how Julian had cheated him, compiled from my father's notes, corroborating his own experience. The second file was a smoking gun, a ledger page showing the wire transfer that moved Marcus's stolen funds directly into one of Julian's other shell corporations, the very same one now being used to drain Carter Holdings. It was the proof he'd never had. The missing link. 2 days later, my burner phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Who is this?" a gravelly voice demanded. "A friend," I said. "Someone who believes Mr. Croft has been flying too close to the sun for far too long." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a low, humorless laugh. "I've been waiting 5 years for a piece of evidence like this. Whoever you are, he's not going to know what hit him." The lawsuit Marcus Thorne would file wouldn't be a quiet affair. He would demand a full, public accounting of Julian's network of companies. He would demand depositions. He would force discovery. He was my wrecking ball, and I had just aimed him squarely at the foundations of their crooked empire. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. Marcus Thorne's lawsuit wasn't a wrecking ball. It was an earthquake. It hit the financial world with a seismic shock. The headlines were sensational. Venerable investor sues Julian Croft, alleges widespread fraud. Marcus didn't just sue for his own damages. His lawyers, armed with the irrefutable proof from my flash drive, filed a RICO case, alleging a pattern of racketeering activity. It was a legal kill shot. The lawsuit was the key that unlocked everything. The discovery process would force Julian's network of shell companies into the light, and the public nature of the allegations gave Ben Holloway the cover he needed. 2 days after the suit was filed, his bombshell exposé dropped on the front page. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Holloway had taken the threads I'd given him and woven them together with Marcus Thorne's story and his own digging. He laid out the entire scheme in devastating detail. The predatory targeting of Carter Holdings, the siphoning of assets, the role of the mysterious Nightingale Shell Company. He even included an artist's rendering of the corporate structure that looked remarkably like the diagrams I had sketched in my own notebooks. He didn't name me, but he painted a damning portrait of 2 men who had exploited a grieving family for their own enrichment. The article went viral. The story was picked up by major news outlets. The SEC, facing public pressure and the evidence from Holloway's article, had no choice but to escalate. Sarah Jenkins's small inquiry blossomed into a full-blown, multi-agency federal investigation. The dominoes, so carefully lined up, began to fall, one after another, in a cascade of beautiful righteous destruction. The Carter Holdings annual shareholder meeting was typically a dry, sparsely attended affair. This year, the hotel ballroom was packed. Journalists lined the walls, cameras flashing. The air crackled with tension. At the head of the room sat a pale and visibly shaken Liam, surrounded by a board of directors who were loyal to Julian's money. Julian himself was conspicuously absent, advised by his lawyers to keep a low profile. Just as the meeting was called to order, the back doors opened. I walked in, not as the ghost, but as myself, Isabella Carter, my father's daughter. I wore a sharp, crimson dress, the color of a reckoning. Beside me walked Maria Flores, her expression calm and resolute. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I saw Liam's eyes widen in sheer panic. He saw me, and in that instant he knew. He knew it was me. I held proxies from Marcus Thorne, from a dozen other smaller shareholders Maria had helped me track down, people who had been squeezed out or ignored. Combined with the significant block of shares my father had left me, it was enough. When the floor was opened for new business, I strode to the microphone. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out the facts from my father's ledger, the facts now being corroborated by a federal investigation. I spoke of his vision for the company, a vision of integrity and growth, and how it had been corrupted from within. The board has failed in its fiduciary duty to protect this company and its shareholders, I concluded, my voice ringing with clarity. It has allowed predators into our house. Therefore, I call for a vote of no confidence and the immediate removal of the current board. It was a stunning, unprecedented move. But the public outrage was on my side. The proxies were counted. The vote was overwhelming. One by one, the board members, their faces a mixture of fury and humiliation, were voted out. Liam sat there, utterly defeated, a captain who had been thrown off his own sinking ship in a mutiny he never saw coming. I was handed the gavel, the interim chair of the company my father had built. The world Julian and Liam had built together was on fire, and there weren't enough lifeboats. Facing an ironclad RICO case, a damning public record, and an aggressive federal investigation, their alliance, forged in greed, dissolved in fear. It was Liam who broke first. He was a coward at his core, a follower, not a leader. He had followed Julian into a conspiracy, and now he would follow his lawyer's advice to save his own skin. I learned of it through a curt phone call from my own legal counsel. Liam's attorney had reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was offering a deal. He would plead guilty to lesser charges. He would forfeit all his ill-gotten gains. And in exchange, he would provide a full confession and testify against the man he once called his best friend. He would be the prosecution's star witness, detailing every crime, every conversation, every secret they had shared. The betrayal was absolute. The two men who had laughed together at the thought of my tears were now poised to destroy each other. Julian, who had always seen other people as pawns, had been checkmated by his own queen. I sat in the back of the federal courtroom, a silent observer. I wasn't there for spectacle. I was there for closure. Julian stood at the defendant's table, looking diminished in a suit that now seemed too big for him. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, desperate man. Liam had already made his deal and was nowhere to be seen. I listened as the prosecutor read the long list of indictments. Fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering. It was the litany of their sins, made public and undeniable. Julian pled not guilty, but it was a futile gesture. With Liam's testimony and the mountain of evidence from my father's ledger, the trial was a formality. He was convicted on all major counts, sentenced to a decade in federal prison, and ordered to pay crippling financial restitution. Liam received a much lighter sentence, 18 months in a minimum security facility and 5 years of probation. He had lost his career, his money, and his reputation. They were both ruined, their names forever linked to the scandal they had engineered. As the bailiffs led Julian away, his eyes swept the courtroom, and for a moment, they met mine. There was no anger left in them. Only the bleak, empty recognition of defeat. I gave him nothing. No smile, no nod. Just a quiet, steady gaze. I had not come for revenge, I realized. I had come for justice. And it had been served. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my father's old office, now my office. The name on the door read Isabella Carter, CEO, Carter Holdings. After the scandal, I had worked tirelessly with Maria and a new, loyal board to restructure and rebuild. We brought back old employees, made amends with wronged partners, and slowly, painstakingly, restored the company's integrity. It was harder work than uncovering the fraud, but it was infinitely more satisfying. The city glittered before me, a tapestry of a million lights and a million stories. The rage that had fueled me for months was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of peace. I had thought reclaiming my father's legacy was the goal, but I had achieved something more. I had reclaimed myself. I had been underestimated, dismissed as a predictable woman they could break for sport. But they never understood that when you try to shatter some things, you don't destroy them. You just create 1,000 sharp, reflective pieces, each one capable of cutting back. The evening air was cool and crisp. I lifted my mug, the steam warming my face. It wasn't a champagne flute celebrating a victory, or a glass of scotch masking a bitter truth. It was a simple cup of coffee, strong and straightforward. It tasted like the start of a new day. My day. I took a sip, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely free. And so, my war ended. Not with a bang, but with the quiet satisfaction of justice served. I rebuilt my father's legacy, but more importantly, I rebuilt myself. The men who wagered on my tears are now just a bad memory. But I'm left with one question for you. Who do you think truly got what they deserved, and who maybe deserved a second chance? Let me know in the comments. Type, too far, if you think my revenge was colder than they deserved. Type justice if you believe they got exactly what was coming to them. I can't wait to read what you think. Thanks for following my story.